Hi, this is Kelsey, and I've decided to do a pre-LPL summer ranking video. You know, since the pre-LPL spring ranking China Talk episode worked out so well for us in general, and we decided not to do it for the last China Talk. We decided to just talk about the teams and not go on this really terribly long tangent. Because, as we all know, Snake ended up bombing terribly. They were the 12th place team, am I right? And King placed 3rd. So absolutely everything that I expected went to pass. There's absolutely no. I think it's still valuable to hash this out and kind of give my thoughts on how well the team will do, given their rosters, where I expect to see them place overall, and especially like how they function, what their strengths are, what their weaknesses are, what their best players are, what their worst players are. This video is going to be a little bit like the China Talk episode, as also the LPL Summer Preview that I wrote up for the score, and I'll put a link to both in the video description. But it's going to be a bit more ranty and a bit more from my perspective, and I also want to break down in more detail why I particularly place teams in this way or not, and where I think the strengths and weaknesses are the teams are, where they're balanced. So I've come up with 4 categories, or 4 I guess cardinal directions of LPL, which is the outplay. Okay, this is going to be your fundamental. This is what teams learn in LSPL, just to like outlane, win lane, win game. You have your team fighting, which is what people typically think of in LPL. Like, that's typically the next thing they learn, is like how to work together with their really strong players, how to organize the cooldowns, like when this goes here, how this happens, what is going on after that. We have drafting, which is actually something that a lot of teams really struggle with, but I think that one thing LPL has gained a lot of, and we saw this a little bit at MSI, I think EDG is probably one of the better drafting teams for sure, but I actually think they're not even the best drafting team in LPL. So that's something that has improved a lot. And then Rotatos, which everyone will always say is going to be the LPL team's biggest weakness. But there are a couple teams that are still really good at this, and so typically in the LPL, you either see teams with very weak individual players, so they lack like this outplay ability, but they have maybe strong drafting and strong Rotatos, or they have strong team fighting and strong drafting. So I'm just going to try to emphasize which of these are probably the most important to how the team has played in the past, or how I expect them to play, and identifying their strengths and weaknesses. I want to add the caveat before we get too deep that this is a preseason ranking, so it's not where I see teams ending up placing based on time played together, all this other stuff. It's just based on who's the best right now and who's going to be the worst right now. If I think teams can ramp up over time, I will make that caveat, but right now this is where you should expect to see that. The team I have in number 12 is Unlimited Potential. Unlimited Potential has risen up from LSPL, and the roster for that team is going to be Lung, Aimi, Zhao Yang, Sketch, and Heart. So Zhao Yang is new, and I don't really know anything about him. I think he's a solo queue talent, so there's not a whole lot to say about him. In the past, their mid lane has always been their weaknesses, so this is kind of like the caveat for Unlimited Potential, is can they be better based on their mid lane? Because they are an LSPL team, their biggest strength is always going to be the outplay. New LSPL teams tend to lack a lot of sophisticated or deep strategy, and almost all of the LSPL team relied on like win lane, win game. Some of them had okay dragon control or things like that, but that was primarily their focus, and I don't think Unlimited Potential is any different. I have some team fighting strengths because they do play mostly around their AD carry, but I wouldn't say that they're necessarily a team fighting team. It's just that Scotch tends to favor like a lot of the Jinx, things like that, and so that allows them to sort of set up team fighting situations a little bit better. But I would say primarily if they don't win lane, they don't do super well. Sketch and Heart have gotten a lot more aggressive as time goes on, again because they did rely on the outplay quite a bit. Has now qualified for LPL twice, and 2 different Vici Gaming teams, because the team used to be called Vici Gaming Potential. He's a very strong, more aggressive style jungler, though he's almost Insect-esque in terms of maybe overextending on dives. Things all changes hurt him a little bit because again, it's all about like the initial 1v1 trades with the jungler. If the other jungler gets more power, then Amy goes down. I rate Amy pretty highly in the context of junglers for a few reasons. One is because he makes like absolutely every LSPL jungler look awful by comparison. At least last split, obviously since more Koreans and things joined, that changed. Hasn't just played against LSPL junglers, he's played against Swift, right? Because Swift also joined the LPL, and they played a couple series. I think that Amy is going to be a pretty strong jungler in the context. Obviously, jungle talent is going to be very, very steep in LPL, so he's not going to be like top 4 or anything, but he is going to do pretty well. Top laner Lung is pretty much a role player. He'll fill that carry style if necessary, or he'll just play the back, things like that. Apollo was their mid laner, and like I said, he was very weak. He would used to just like die sometimes. So they started playing with their actually AD carry sub Xuan, I believe is how you pronounce his name. But he went to Vici Gaming as an AD carry sub for them. So that is no longer the case. They now have Jiayang, like I said. I hope Jiayang does significantly better than Apollo, but for now I am going to put Unlimited Potential at number 12, just because of how steep the competition is in general, and they haven't really adopted a lot of sophisticated style. They really just rely on getting that bot lane ahead. I actually have Master 3 at number 11. This might be surprising since they were probably the strongest team in the promotion series, but the thing about Master 3 is my understanding is that there's like this very toxic environment, and players who have been benched have all come out and said that Dade is the problem. Like Dreams has actually said he got benched because he smelled bad. Okay, their jungler. Dade said he smelled bad or something. Candy came out and said that actually Love CD's the problem, Love CD's the bully, so either way you spin it, it just doesn't sound like a very good environment. Is going to be a major wild card because of their mid laner. I really don't understand where to put Dade. As a jungler, Kandi is kind of decent. I will say, I actually think his biggest strength is in their drafting. I've seen a lot, and this is going to sound funny because Dade has a propensity to kind of counterpick himself. At the end, they save their mid lane pick for Dade, and he counterpicks himself, but they're actually also very good at identifying weaknesses of opposing teams and banning appropriately, preparing against these teams, and that's actually how I would attribute a lot of their wins. The other aspect that they're going to be good at mostly is still going to be the outplay, and this is where I give them a lot of pause, because in terms of the outplay, you have Looper, who's not really going to do that all the time. Dade shows up when he decides to show up, like if he plays LeBlanc, he can invade and kill your jungler repeatedly, but that's about it. Love CD is actually very strong in terms of engage and knowing when to go in, but if you don't have an AD carry, the right synergy, a consistent AD carry, the right synergy for that is just not going to happen. I actually thought they were working really well with Candy, but Candy obviously had champion pool limitations. That's probably the main reason why Love CD wanted Candy to be switched out for SMLZ. SMLZ has always kind of been that player who could be really good, or seems really good in solo queue and in the amateur scene, who Wei Xiao said was his disciple, right? He handpicked him as his disciple. But he has never really gotten off the ground in LPL or done extremely well in LPL. He's kind of like Shia, I would say. Where I see them placing 11th, despite the fact that they have Dade, they have Looper. I just don't see them caring or really putting much into anything. So I don't think putting them in 11th is that shocking. Number 10, I have Royal Never Give Up. The reason why I have Royal Never Give Up at number 10, despite the fact that a lot of people say, oh, this team is actually going to be good, they have the best players from Team King, the best players from DMC, I don't even agree with that sentiment. I actually thought Assassin was probably the second best player on King during the regular season of LPL last split. He stepped up in a really huge way. Previously, I would say he was like their second weakest player in the preseason, but when Sky was having champion pool issues, when the bottom line, when Lucian was having problems, like he could only play Sivir or whatever, he actually looked like probably the second best player on the team, the best player being Lei. I would agree that Lei is probably their support, is probably their strongest player on King. which is very different from Gamgee, who had probably the worst support in the league, but thank goodness he's not playing. It is going to be Lay. Top lane will be Let Me, who I do think is an upgrade from Sky, which people who watch the preseason or LSPL wouldn't have guessed you'd say, because he was a really, really solid carry for King for most of the offseason LPL and LSPL. He played a really, really strong Aurelia, but he just like seemed to flounder on pretty much everything else after he joined LPL. And Let Me has shown a lot more depth, a lot more ability to be a role player, so that's a good change. Qiao Gu, I actually think, is really interchangeable with Assassin in terms of skill level. I think Qiao Gu actually tends to overcommit on some things that he shouldn't, but I actually think that would be a good injection for King, because King, in the past, has relied a lot on just playing safe. Early preseason, King had like actually pretty good rotations in terms of where to make early moves on the map, things like that, but that definitely declined. And later on, they became mostly focused on outplay and not even so much outplay. Team fighting, I would say, would be their biggest strength after a while. The drafting was atrocious. They could outplay very well. That was like their off-season strength, their rotators and their outplay. Early moves, they would get the huge lane leads, and they would end the game that way. Now, their team fighting seems to be their biggest quality. Like, they just passively lost a lot, but they team fought pretty well, and that's how they got their wins when they were together. MLXG, okay, and this is a bit controversial because I actually think MLXG has always been King's weakest player. I know he's very popular, actually, and people regard him as like a pretty strong jungler for whatever reason. Kakao actually even made the statement that he thinks he's China's best Chinese jungler, which, I don't know, whatever. His issue is that he does overcommit on team fights. I think he got a lot of the credit because when they did make those off-season moves, he was the shot caller, so that's fair enough. After, again, when they joined LPL, they didn't have that quality anymore either, and he just ended up like brute forcing a lot of the team fights. He was really bad in Italy. He made it work. He's a decent shot caller. The team needs a decent shot caller. I actually think Claire was a better jungle option from Gamgee. But again, MLXG is going to be more popular. He plays more champions than Jarvan. It's a good thing. Though he mostly plays just Rek'Sai. Qiao, I think, is a good move, though Let Me is a good move. I think it's a good idea to keep Wushin and Lei together. I think Tail is a very good player, but I don't think he's better than Wushin. And I think Wushin and Lei as a pair is probably stronger because they compensate for their strengths and weaknesses in different ways. If Lei makes some over-aggressive engagements, Wushin is very good at backing him up. If Wushin tumbles forward awkwardly on Vayne, like, Lei is really good at disengaging and carrying him out. It's just really a mess. Like, the fact that I think that there are a lot of upgrades who do well at team fighting, who do well at outplay. I could actually see this team bumping up a little bit over. So the next two teams probably are in contention or pretty closely ranked with this one, and I could place them in any order. Okay, number 9. King, to clarify, is not King from last, but King is Cola, Insect, Corn, Name, Zero. So I have another video about this, so suffice it to say that Royal Club purchased the Vici Gaming potential spot, Vici Gaming purchased the Gamgee spot, Royal Club and King swapped rosters. The background of this is that actually I think Royal Club bought like a bunch of these spots, potentially a bunch of these spots and the team, so Gamgee King, both of them, and they decided to put the roster that they thought was strongest in the spot with the most circuit points. So that's part of my basis for this assessment, is that I think that they see the King roster as a stronger roster than the Royal Club roster, and that's why they put them in this spot, to give them those circuit points and a better chance at Worlds. I kind of agree. I have to agree, because the other players are mechanically talented and individual, and they rely on team fighting. They team fight very well, but Cola, Insect, Corn, Name, Zero all have a lot more experience than they do, and Name and Insect have been on some of the greatest teams that League of Legends has kind of known in their respective regions. So it just seems like more business sense to put this roster on this team. Now, in terms of what I expect this team to look like and play like, the reason why they are so low, I do see them having a fairly high ceiling, is because I don't think Name's shot calling has been very good at all so far. Name was a brand new shot caller to and they said they had faith in his ability to do it, but so far, like, the engagements have been questionable, some of the decisions and the movements have been questionable. I think some of the rotations are good. I think I underrated it a little bit initially, because they do lane swap sometimes. They just seem opposed to it, because I think that they're ingrained that if they can't win lane, they can't win the game. So I do expect them to play a lot on outplay, in particular in their bottom lane, because Zero and Name are going to be very, very strong together. There have been instances where Zero just gets a lot of gold and becomes a monster either on Kennen or Aurelia. Oh, good. That Aurelia Callista duo. We don't talk about it. It was terrible. We don't ever want to see it again. Has always been very outplay driven. I think that this will also be a very good team fighting team with time. That's what all their roots are in. Name is very good at being a positional carry. Korn loves to play some of these protect styles. He's also good on assassins, which he's done well on when they were more outplay focused. The team works best when Insect goes in and everyone follows him up. Like that's the crux of it right there. So I do see that this being their eventual identity, but right now I think they're still really stuck on the outplay. Their drafting is bad, their map movements are okay, like they were improving. They had moments where they had smart lane swap decisions, things like that, but in general, they're just a very outplay focused team right now, and I see them eventually moving into team fighting. Number 8 might be a surprise to some of you. I have number 8 being OMG. They just released their roster, in theory. Like, we only have 178 in NGA as a source, so I haven't used it officially on the score, but I'm pretty confident that this is actually going to be their roster. Qiao top. We're just going to call him Review Jungle because that was his name in LSPL. Cool. UCI, AD Carry, and Amazing and Support. I think Amazing and Review are pretty decent. Amazing was like a really good support player. Kind of was a backup jungler. He wasn't extremely stellar. I think overall Loveling is still a better jungler. Young top was never pretty. They played it in they played it in some third-party tournament. It was the very first third-party tournament. People were worried that this would become a permanent thing, like Qiao top going AD carry. It did not come to pass for the spring split, but Qiao top is back. This is going to be a long-term solution. I think that this is kind of like a Gambit benches Darien move, where they expect going to see the error of his ways, be more motivated. It worked with Zatai and Invictus Gaming, I think, when they benched him for rookie. He became much more motivated, he role swapped, he really wanted to get back on the team. So I can kind of see them trying the same approach for going. I really don't think Qiao is a long-term solution at all. Amazing. The problem is that they're removing like 2 shot caller type personalities in Loveling and Going, but they're putting one back on. Amazing, and one of their big problems was that they had too many people who wanted to lead and not enough like follower type personalities. I think maybe Amazing can take a back seat, but he was the shot caller for the LSPL OMG team. Yeah, the fact that they're building this team around Cool and UZI means that they are very, 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 very outplay focused. They have one of the stronger AD carries in LPL in terms of duelist potential in the lane, and one of the stronger mid laners in LPL in terms of 1v1ing and carrying from mid lane. Cool and UZI actually got the highest proportion of team gold resource relative to their role of any mid or AD carry in LPL last split, which meant that Going and Loveling relatively were very, very gold starved. So when people say things like Going and Loveling were the reason why people were losing lane, well, if you're putting all your ganks in bottom lane with Cool and Loveling, and you're putting all your gold on your AD carry and your mid laner, you're going to have a very, very resource starved top in jungle. So if they try to do anything, which historically the team has revolved around Loveling ganking top, and then Loveling and Going, leading Cool with invades to tank the jungler effectively, or to take the buff. Things like that, moving as a trio. But if you don't have gold on Go Going, if you don't have gold on Loveling, and Cool isn't moving with them, they're just going to feed effectively, and that's what happened. Go Going and Loveling got very far behind most games, and I think that as a result, a lot of their fan base ended up blaming them, which I don't necessarily see as the problem. Of course, I've already mentioned things like too many cooks in the kitchen, too many shot callers. That's a big problem. You want to alleviate some of that pressure if possible. Another thing is that people said that Go Going was focusing much more on the streaming honeys than perhaps he should have on the game, and that's probably, again, the motivation thing. Loveling didn't look as comfortable in Cinderhulk. Again, so many teams are getting ahead by getting their jungler ahead in the Cinderhulk meta, but if he's like the lowest relative to the role average, he is the furthest behind of any other LPL player in terms of gold values. So that's really, really bad for them in the Cinderhulk meta. I hope that they give their new jungler more gold. I think that's going to be very beneficial for them. It's going to do well. If not, they're going to have a top jungle and support who are still underfarmed. I don't know. We'll see how it goes. I don't see a team like this succeeding. Like, they just rely way too much on the outplay. I think with this roster in particular, there's so much attention on mid and bottom getting very far ahead. And that's probably going to be entirely how they play. You still have the problem with UZI and Cool playing very different styles. Naturally, Cool wants to play pick style. UZI wants everyone to bring Peel and play 5v5s in the late games. So that's still a huge stylistic clash. That's still a problem LMG is going to have to deal with. And I don't see them going far. I see them potentially, like, when some of these rosters like RNG and King level up, I could see them even falling into the bottom 4. Which is a really sad thing to say about a roster that's had this many star-strike players. Like, OMG was kind of warming the seat of the dynasty of the Chinese dynasty after WE's fall and before EG rose. So, just really, really sad to see this right now. And I hope they make the adjustments. And I heard they are getting a new coach, but drafting was terrible with their old coach. That was a huge problem. They probably had the worst drafting in the league with their old coach. So I hope it gets a little bit better. Given as much as I talked down about Qiao Gu, the other LSPL team rising up to LPL, you would expect them to be rated lower than this. But I think that one thing that some of my compatriots have overlooked about Qiao Gu is just how strong Swift is and how important I do think junglers are in the meta. Or not just the meta, historically in the history of the game. Pretty much since AD carries got nerfed, I think jungle has become a huge priority. Like, I'm feeling that jungle pressure across the map, if your jungle gets ahead in the first 10 minutes, gives you a much more likely chance of winning the game than getting any other role ahead in the first 10 minutes. If you have Cinderhulk, because of the multiplicative stats and the fact that snowballs out of control, and your jungler's ahead, then there's like no way for the enemy team to come back from that. I think Swift is so strong, is why I rate Qiao Gu as high as I do. I think Qiao Gu is going to function a lot like WE, which is going to be like their jungler against the world. Very, very outplay again. See, you're noticing the trends with these bottom teams is that they aren't going to have like the sophisticated drafting, the sophisticated rotatos. Maybe they have some team fighting prowess here and there, like RNG. That's probably like the fact that I think RNG and King can become strong team fighting team is I think what's going to lift them up over time. Play potential on Qiao Gu is very high. In the top lane, who's been around for LSPL for a while, he's another good role playing top laner. Swift, who was probably one of the top 3 junglers in the world last year, finally making it into LPL to test his strength against like Spirit, Dandy, Clear Love, Cacao. I actually think Cacao right now is the best jungler in the world. But I'm more when we get to IG. Mid laner is Doinby, who really, really limited champion pool plays like Katarina. And then you have Katarina, maybe some other stuff. Like Victor, he played Victor. He played like Cat and Victor last we saw him. Bottom lane is very interesting. If you know LMQ, you recognize TCT as more. And TNT has been around for a while. He used to play on LMQ before they came to North America. He was considered like the strongest player on the roster. Well in Demacia Cup against some of those stronger bot lanes like OMG's, UZI and Cloud bot lane. They did really, really well. Overall, Qiao Gu again, just strong areas where they can outduel you, at 1v1 you, and just really, really hard outplay, especially in the jungle in the bottom lane. I see this bottom lane actually being pretty strong, at least middle of the pack in the context of all the other bottom lanes. I see the jungle being extremely strong. So that's why I put Qiao Gu a little bit higher than perhaps some of my colleagues. I think they are going to be able to win a lot of games early on this outplay potential. We've made it to the halfway point. We're at number 6. People who know how much I bashed WE last split are probably surprised to see them this far up. I think we saw an influx of a lot of outplay teams. So WE has a slight edge over those because over time we've seen them develop a little bit of strategy and their drafting has improved. They have severe limitations in terms of champion pools on their top laner, Aluka, who's staying the same, and their mid laner, Xia, who is frankly not as comfortable in some of these control majors. He's done mostly very well on Assassin. So those are going to be huge problems. Their AD carry, Mystic, has kind of, because of this, been forced into a more carry-style role. And I think he's much more comfortable, or late-game carry-style role, and I think he's much more comfortable with being strong in lane. So I think Xia and Mystic are both naturally lane players, but Mystic has been forced into this more late-game centric role. It's a bit of an issue. I think Conan will start, but they did sign Dada 7, so that is really, really questionable as to why they do that. I know Conan and Yuja both wanted out a little bit. Now, Spirit makes this team still very, very outplay centric. Spirit just kind of controls everything. He makes very, very fast movements around the map, kind of dumpsters you early on and kills you. So there's a little bit of, in addition to the outplay element, a little bit of a rotation game going on. I still think it's a bit extreme to call them a rotation-based team, but their team fighting is really, really bad, and a lot of the early moves usually win them games. And it's not just outplay, it's not just like 1v1ing, so I would say they lean more into that element. I also think their drafting is pretty decent. They work well within the limitations they have securing some of these picks, but it pales into comparison of some of the really, really strong drafting teams. And if they get their top lane banned out, I don't really think they know where to go within the drafting parameters. When they get their top lane banned out, they kind of just fall apart a little bit. I can't really call them a drafting team, but they're good. They have stronger early game and pretty good outplay with their jungler. I can see them falling as some of these other teams rising just because of the mechanical limitations. But right now, I think they're pretty good to start in about 6th place. So, good for them. Yay, Spirit has elevated the 12th place team to 6th place. Congratulations, Spirit. Something you should know about Vici Gaming is they're most definitely not an outplay team. They are a rotation-based team, and a lot of this comes from the limitations of the fact that they can't be an outplay team, right? Because they have a pretty weak mid laner and a pretty weak AD carry and an okay top laner. Like, Katong in a team fighting situation will just die. The Sealy isn't going to be a more aggressive team fighter. He's going to be very good at, like, a janitorial style. But if you don't have, like, a playmaker, that doesn't work. Carry, I think, is sort of forced in that role. So they do a lot of lane swaps to try to get him ahead. And a lot of their lane swaps can be very effective. Can get him leads up to, like, 60 CS or so. They've added a bunch of stuff. Dushi, I don't actually think Dushi will actually appear on the roster. He's mostly known as a popular streamer who plays a lot of Aurelia. And he is really good at Aurelia, but he's mostly, that's pretty much all he plays. But since he's a popular streamer and a lot of other clubs like LGD Gaming have subs and people around just to try to get them stream revenue like Fire Lily, I can kind of see that being an approach that Vici Gaming is taking. They also have a mid lane sub Pung, who could, I haven't seen him play. He wasn't even on a TGA team. He was just like on some really low level team, but he could be good. And you have Xuan, who again I saw him play mid lane. Number 1, Endless from KX Happy. So KX Happy's Endless was pretty good, but he wasn't as good as the player who ended up replacing him. I think he might be probably about the same as Vasily. I have no idea. I think Shuan was okay as a mid laner. I think they're going to try these players out and see if they can give them more quote-unquote rotational depth. Really, I think they're just going to see if they can get lucky and find an upgrade over Hitam or Vasily so that they can play more than just like this rotation-based style. I also think that they're actually one of the really good drafting teams I talked about. And the reason why I think this is because they were like one of the first teams to expose Snake. They did this twice in picks and bans where they just banned out like the very obvious junglers, and then later they banned out some AD carries and put Crystal in a very uncomfortable situation. So I think that Vici Gaming is going to be really strong in terms of drafting and rotations. Unfortunately, against IG in the quarterfinals, they didn't show that very much. They got pretty outplayed really hard in both aspects by IG. I think IG is that good of a rotational team. The fact that they got out-rotated at like one of their strongest teams by IG was not good. I think IG is, it makes sense that IG is like really good, better drafting, because I think IG actually probably has the best drafting. Mata really controls the lane in some of these lane swap situations that allow Carry and Vasily to get ahead, and then they can just move around, slowly take towers, slowly take objectives until they have such a big gold lead that it doesn't matter if their team fighting isn't that good, they can just beat you. And that's when they win the game. They are last, but they were not very good in 1v1 matchups. They didn't have a lot of straight-up talent on the roster. They had very big limitation in their mid laners champion pool. The fact that they were forced to play a very specific style centered around an AD carry who had a tendency to overextend. And their top laner did really poorly in lane swaps. Like, he ended up extremely underfarmed, and he just got screwed over. So if they didn't have a strong front line, the AD carry got cut out much more, and this ended up being a lot of what people abused to take down Snake, which is why even though they ended up finishing second in the regular season, they only placed 4th overall in the playoffs. Had some really exciting roster changes over the split. They picked up Martin from their LSPL team, who plays a lot of different champions. We saw him in IET play like Jinx and Sipper. Crystal doesn't play those champions, so that adds a lot more rotational depth to their roster. The other thing is that they picked up Yu as a mid laner. I really wanted someone to pick up Yu from LGD Gaming, who's just sitting on the bench, because I think he's a really strong team fighter. The fact that Snake was already a team fighting team and then they acquired Yu just means that their team fighting prowess goes through the roof, and they're like now probably going to be, if the synergy works well, which I hope it works well, for them, and also for the sake of the competitiveness of LPL, they're going to be like one of the best team fighting teams to watch. And they also have a little bit of a power upgrade because Baka was like a really sore spot on their roster in terms of champion pool depth and in some cases mechanics. I'd say right now is probably a top 5 mid laner in the LPL and has time to expand and to grow and to up in the rankings. So pick up for them, ups their mechanics, ups their champion pool. He's really good at playing like the wave clear style and stalling out games the way Baka used to, and also really good at team fighting, like landing those 4-man ults. So he can allow them to play their same style better, and since he has some fondness for assassins, he can open doors for them to play a more versatile style that they put in Martin for a more flexible playing game every once in a while. And then Flandra will also be freed up to play a more carry role in those situations too, which I think he's overall much better at like carry style top lane than he is at the tank style or the supportive style. So I think that will be very good for them. Sore spots for them, again, the outplay. I don't think like their 1v1 is even that good, but because they have a smart way about it, they can do decently in lane, so that will improve. Also with the U acquisition, their rotatos are not the best, but they're very good at abusing that area around Dragon and setting it up with vision to make sure that blue buff area to make sure that they can get the terrain they want for their team fight. So again, it goes back to their awesome team fighting. Their drafting isn't even that good. So all of these limitations, but the fact that their team fighting was so good was the single reason Snake was rated so highly last play. I think this will add to their already good team fighting and maybe allow them to play a little bit more smarter with drafts. The coveted top 3. The favorites for Worlds currently, the ones that people care about, right? This is going to be very boring because starting with Snake, it just goes from 4-3-2-1 from last year's playoffs, but I think that actually really stacks up. There's no longer OMG to throw a monkey in the wrench and potentially pull forward, I don't think. Our courses for me now are going to be the RNG and King rosters that could pull ahead. Potentially Qiao Gu, potentially WE actually, but I still think that those two teams have too many limitations in terms of ability to either form a strategy or just have strong players overall. These are limitations that Invictus Gaming in particular doesn't have, and EDG doesn't particularly have. LGD still has a pretty big player weakness in their jungle, I think, but so potentially IG could end up second, is kind of where I'm putting them in the long term. Now I think Invictus Gaming is pretty staunchly third, just because I think that they have a lot that they can improve on in terms of the rotation category. Their early movements still aren't good. I still don't think they have the best handle on split pushing. They play a lot of counter strategy, so they have some good ideas and see it developing, but right now they're just very much a drafting team. They win so many of their games in drafting. I think, as I've said before, they've had probably the best drafting in LPL. Big props to Mafa, who's going to be their current head coach. Pumandu helped with that before too. And they have really good team fighting, I think is really solid. So drafting, team fighting are going to be their top two strengths here. They also rely a lot on the outplay. So getting rookie ahead is the primary focus of this team. So Qiao leading the charge, getting rookie ahead, and that duo being the solid, like, potentially the best jungle mid duo in LPL. Like, I'm pretty confident in saying that they are the best jungle mid duo in LPL, because I also think that they're the best jungler individually and the best mid laner individually in LPL since the patch change from Cinderhulk. I think Spirit was better before, but I think that Qiao adapted to the new junglers and making them effective better than pretty much any other jungler. And then Rookie's just always been really, really strong. Their faults are going to be in terms, but I don't see their bottom lane like isn't going to be this outplay heavy. They're still going to be mostly focused on team fighting. So that's where it's a little bit like I think top lane Zatai has actually done a lot of good work in 1v1. He's done okay in lane swaps, but again, Zatai's always been kind of a fighting is going to be their main focus going forward, and just like their godlike drafting. The fact that they have such deep champion pools means that they have a lot of options in terms of a draft. I think in the IET finals, like one of the last games, they were able to like pick away Spirit's champion and ban one of them, and then ban out Aluka also, and then they also early picked Cassiopeia, so Shia had like nothing to play. So they banned out 3 players in like the first rotation, or picked away 3 players on W, which should never happen, right? High on them, probably higher on them than a lot of people who watch LPL, just because I do think that they have lacked some element of seriousness and some element of strategy. This is a little bit of a cheat, okay? Putting LGD up here now because I don't think they'll actually be a number 2 team right now because they are able to start with PYL, their main shot caller, captain, support, who's responsible for a lot of their early game decision making, and the fact that LGD is a really good rotation-based team. They have play good lane swaps, they get to the early and mid objectives really well. Their dragon control is really, really strong in the early and mid game. That's typically where they would come back, is that they would actually intentionally put themselves behind during the regular season to try to compensate for the lack of jungle pressure issued by TBQ with frequent roams from Boyless and PYL. And then they would come back in well-timed dragon fights. They were pretty good at mid-game team fighting. I would say that team fighting isn't one of their core strengths, but they can be very good at it. I would say like drafting is not as good for them. They have a lot of outplay potential since the meta change though. So Rotatos and outplay makes them have like a really solid, strong early to mid game. Very strong in lane. Acorn and Flame are both very strong in lane in the top lane, and then Imp and PYL is extremely, it's probably the best bot lane. in LPL. Like, you can, I think Deft is probably a better AD carry, but because PYL is such a strong support player, and because their duo is so devastating when PYL doesn't have to roam and they can just sit in lane, really, really powerful bottom lane. So rotatos and outplay is a really solid thing for LGD, kind of hidden by some of the patch changes and some of the meta. He doesn't have to force as much stuff, he can just farm and get ahead. And some junglers like Nunu, Gragas. Naturally, also, the fact that LGD is inclined to do a lot of roams and a lot of movements as a 3 means that they have pretty good vision control, and they set up lane swaps really well, so those are going to be LGD's main strengths. And TBQ is a weakness in almost every stage of the game. It's minimized a little bit by the fact that he can play like these lower mechanical tank junglers. So expect a lot of Nunu contest, a lot of Gragas contest in LGD games, because those are going to be his bread and butter champions. Because I consider LGD very smart in this rotation-based style, their drafting isn't bad, it's pretty good. They have like good concept and good idea behind their own drafting. It's not going to be as good as IGs or EDGs, but that doesn't make it terrible. I think, like, again, LPL drafting is pretty good overall. So team fighting, again, mid-game team fighting really strong. Wireless plays really good like control mages like the Cho'Gath, the Orianna. Imp is pretty good team fighter. PYL is good at controlling the zones. It's just TBQ gets in weird positions and does weird things, and sometimes their Baron calls are really bad. But drum roll. Let's just light up the screen with everything. Potatoes, better. No, I don't actually think this is true. I don't even think their rotatos are that good, but I will give them pretty much everything else. I don't think their rotatos are terrible, but I think their drafting is very good, their team fighting is really strong, and they have really powerful outplay potential, and each player in every role is pretty powerful. Their main strengths are going to be in drafting and team fighting, like IG, if I have to pick 2, okay, only. Same thing for IG, if I have to pick 2, right, it's drafting and team fighting. Really strong from Aaron, very solid. I think that IG, Maha, Puendu could still outplay him, actually. I'm really high on IG's drafting. But they're always aware of the kind of composition they want to run, and what they're going to have to do to counter their opponent composition. So how are we going to get to a back line? It's a very good question. Because the big issue is always going to be this team fighting, right? How are we going to get to the back line? How are we going to kill their AD carry? How are we going to zone for our AD carry? What picks should we get to make sure that we have enough damage? What picks should we get so we have enough tank line? What kind of style composition do we want to run? What counters their composition? These are all questions that are very present in their drafting. But some of their early mid-game team fighting is but their late-game team fighting is really, really strong. That's where they're going to shine, with Deft, Clearlove, and Koro, one in particular, who have, like, Koro with his really good zoning ability, and his ability to get to the back line and zone out the damage dealer, because he's always focused on the AD carry. Clearlove, who is really good at peeling, whose strength is engaged, and Pawn is, like, off somewhere doing stuff. Pawn's job is to be crazy, and do crazy things, so that they have all their jungle pressure focused on mid lane from the enemy team, and the top and bottom lanes can do pretty much whatever they want and win lanes pretty easily. That would be the key to Edward Gaming. I see if a lot of teams start ignoring Pawn, he'll put himself in increasingly ridiculous situations and get himself killed, and so the team can just abuse bottom and top lane also, and then get occasionally a free Pawn kill. Of course, it's not that simple, because he does roam effectively. They do put a lot of wards on the map so they can catch out junglers. Edward Gaming is a really difficult team to dismantle, and I see them still being at the top at the end of the split with some of the adaptations that they might be able to make. They've been adaptable. They've been ahead for nearly undefeated for 6 months at this point. So, and they've only ever lost 7 total games with Core 1 and Clearlove on Deft and Mako. And 3 of those games have been SK Telecom T1s. They've only ever lost 4 games to Chinese teams. Maybe they won't win Worlds. I think it'll still be very close between them and whoever the top Korean team is, but that's the big thing of this split, right? Is who can overcome Edward Gaming? Who can take that top spot from them? Is it anyone? Is it going to happen this split? Because it will happen eventually in China, right? Some of the contenders we expected, like OMG, we tanked, right? So it has to be like the IG, the LGD, Snake, maybe if we're reaching like deep enough, RNG King. If you're just looking at like pure talent on rosters and not so much expecting them to develop strategy over time, I think talent needs to be a baseline to overcome Edward Gaming. It's going to be really rough though. I can't see WE doing it with the limitations they have. I can't see Vici Gaming doing it with the limitations they have. Qiao Gu, I think it'll take too long for Qiao Gu and Unlimited Potential. For Gaming, King of the Mountain, will they fall?